No, I
There's
see exactly.
a reality where Russians are running out of tanks, running out of rations, running out of
But they are.
missiles, fighting with shovels. They have no morale. I mean, this is the reality that Western mainstream media has been trying to shovel, like feces, into our brains for the last few years. But it's the reality on the battlefield. With essentially, Russia's not just demilitarizing the Kiev regime in Ukraine; they've effectively demilitarized much of NATO at this point.
I was looking forward to the debate section, and I think we arrived at it, right? Look, I'm surprised by how much you and I, Mark, have agreed on certain points, but come on. The Russians are really going to go head to head with the whole of the NATO alliance, right? I don't support everything about NATO, just to be clear, but just what tit for tat? Most of the European members of NATO are not even in war economies. If we put literally the same footing of Russia in a wartime economy where they're spending 30% of their entire GDP on defense expenditure.
What era is that? Because that's not right now.
It is. They're spending upwards of $147 billion. And the biggest problem with spending all your money on defense expenditure is it doesn't have any longer term supply side effects. That's the basics of economics, because half the equipment that they produce is destroyed, lost, reacquired by the enemy forces. It doesn't have long term benefits, right? I think we can agree that Russia has the momentum, to use a keyword, I think there, in Pokrovsk. But they are putting all their emphasis on the Eastern Front from a military standpoint in Ukraine, to the point where Trump has managed to negotiate an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, which is basically a preset for defense peace plan or whatever, between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey. Turkey is taking over the Caucasus, basically. They are the regional hegemon there now. Why? Because Russia is so stretched in Ukraine, they can't even come to the defense of Armenia in the past 3 years. Armenia activated the CSTO, or Collective Security Treaty Organization, and Russia didn't do shit. And that's because they can't, right? What has Russia done?
Why would they do anything?
The aid of, where was Russia for Bashar
al-Assad? Azerbaijani territory.
Where was Putin when Bashar al-Assad collapsed? Where was he for his long-standing supporter in Syria? Nowhere, because all his forces are tied up in Ukraine. Even Russia's failing in Mali, in the Sahel, because they can't get their shit together in Ukraine. So to claim that the Russians are doing well, or that they're not suffering losses of a significant size, is idiotic. It's just silly. Ukraine is suffering a lot. I'm not denying that, but to deny Russia's not suffering is just dark.
Very little reality to the description that is going on here. Pyotr suggested that this conflict was ultimately going to be decided by economy, right? Because it is a war of attrition. That is the type of war that Russia has waged from the beginning. But it's not Russia's economy that is teetering on the brink of collapse. It is the West's. Germany is in recession. The United Kingdom and France, their own ministers are talking about the needs to take IMF bailouts. The United States is also teetering on the edge of recession, and Trump's idea of waging some tariff war against the world has resulted in him being bitch slapped over a barrel by China. And the U.S. is not in a very good economic situation. It's the opposite. And the Kiev regime has no economy, right? It is entirely dependent on $100 billion worth of handouts every year to keep the lights on in the regime and the conscription press gangs trolling the streets, right? It is going to be decided economically, but there's a completely different reality of where the weakness on the side of this conflict is.
Okay, if I can make a couple points to that. So firstly, yeah, sure. No one's denying that the West has issues. I'm currently coming to you from London, which is a dump. Everyone's trying drastically to see the state of the UK as, it's not that bad. No, it's a shit show right now. The UK economy is a joke. And a lot of Western economies are struggling. But that does not negate the fact that Russia's struggling, right? Russia is having to import energy from China. They are having to cut costs on pensions, which is something Putin really doesn't want to do, because one of his biggest supporter bases is the older rural communities of Russia. Not a good idea. Also, to your point about America, I mean, we're flip-flopping. Right now, we've got Marco Rubio, who's gung-hoing for America to just get stuck into a forever war in Venezuela. So, yeah, it's not exactly a great idea. But I think this is where I get frustrated by not necessarily just you, but like people who are like, Ukraine can win everything. No, they can't. It's not that simple. But equally on the Russian side, Russia's fine. They're crippling the Ukrainians. And trust me, I worked on one of the most critical reports during my time at the World Bank and yes, you could say I'm part of the deep state or globalist hegemon or whatever bollocks, but it gave me direct experience when it comes to the true costs to rebuild Ukraine. Now, they've done reiterations of this report over the past couple of years, but the first one was in August of 2022, and the low estimate was $500 billion to rebuild the Ukrainian economy completely. Now, there are a few things like turning it into net zero. But anyway, in comparison, in modern money, the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, all of Europe, by the Americans in 1948, 9, whatever, was 147 billion. So we're talking about 3.5 times almost the cost of the Marshall Plan, just to build one singular country, which is insane. So both countries are screwed right now. And my biggest concern as someone who has Russian heritage is also the demographic impact. Right, this is going to cost the Russian people, the Russian population, tons. And ultimately, there's one country that is benefiting from all of this, which is China. And I'm very concerned about the potential. China's looking at Manchuria with, interest. Maybe they'll annex the territory in eastern China, in Russia.
Ooh, yellow peril. Ooh, so
Maybe.
scared.
Maybe.
This is such a colonialist copium trope, to try to demonize China on the way out of this. But there's one thing that we agree on is that the cost of rebuilding Ukraine is going to be completely devastated at the end of this conflict. And I don't believe that we're anywhere near the end of this conflict. There's a whole world of destruction ahead, quite unfortunately. And
just to point out,
my wife is Crimean. I have family all over Ukraine. So I'm very familiar with the state of the people. We've got family in Kharkov, in Odessa, in Donbass, and the cost of reconstruction of this country after this really devastating conflict is going to be crippling for whoever controls what or whatever is left of Ukraine at the end of it.
Pyotr, just one argument being made that Putin wants to continue this war because his economy has become dependent on the war economy. First, do you agree with that argument? And second, how does that argument make sense? Because a peace deal would definitely include lifting of sanctions and probably certain business dealings with the US as the Russian economy opens up. So wouldn't that be more lucrative than the current war economy?
Of course it is. I think having studied Russia in my master's, like one of the things that I've really come to appreciate is the different mindsets Putin's, as he's gotten older, he's gone through sort of revisements, also because of exogenous factors like Bush's statements over Ukraine and Georgia joining, which led to the 2008 Georgian war, or the 2012 Snow Revolution, or the Maidan events in 2014. But so I mainly used to think of Putin as largely a strategist, pragmatist. But he clearly has some more ideological drives here. And I think he's put so much emphasis on taking all of Ukraine, forcing Ukraine to pivot back eastwards, because ultimately this is why it is a proxy war, at least ideologically, because Ukraine is in a tug of war. It's in a tug of war between the West and Russia. Russia doesn't want to lose Ukraine, and where obviously there's a lot of historical significance with Novgorod and Kievan Rus and all that sort of stuff, but also because it's the strategical influence of America gets even more power, undermining Russian security interests. And you've got another country, the biggest European nation other than Russia, with NATO potentially. Russia does feel surrounded. Containment policy of the Cold War. I get it. But Putin's put so much emphasis on this ideologically, I think, that he can't let go. He doesn't want to let go. His entire legacy now as the protector, as the upholder as the mighty Russian Empire or whatever Russian state depends on it now. I mean, obviously, it would make sense. Probably cut your losses. At the end of the day, the war will stop. All Russia has to do is leave Ukraine. And if they really want to hold referendum, they can do that. I'm not against referendum in the sense of do it through the UN. That's where the UN has a role, right? If you want to talk about whether the oblasts in the East want to suddenly become a part of Greater Russia, okay, that's not exactly an easy conversation to have. But in a perfect world, that's what will be held. We have it in the Security Council, we have the UN mandate, and then it's done. And then if they want to go off to Russia, then that's how it works under international law. But because Putin invaded, that's all completely gone out the window. And so Putin's ultimate, I agree with you in the sense of I think his longer term benefit would be to just call it quits or just pause, just stop the fighting, don't even withdraw. And then Trump will say, well, Putin's not seeking war anymore. We'll lift some sanctions. And then you'll get more businesses coming back in. I know for a fact from friends of mine in Moscow that there are plenty of Western outlets, Prada being one, I don't know, loads of fashion brands, high-end retail brands the Russians love, with their shops. They're completely empty, but the electricity is paid for, the lights are on. They're just waiting.